the deconstructing of a car paint scratch. So whether you are a do-it-yourselfer or you just recently had a mishap with your car or you're a up-and-coming professional detailer, every scratch, blemish on your car is unique. Literally, every chip, scratch, whatever is unique. So that's why I decided to label this the deconstructing of a scratch, because that's where you have to go into, if you're a beginner, a true novice, you literally have to become a, what's the word I'm looking for? A detective. And you have to scrutinize that scratch, the chip, whatever it is, and figure out what is going on. So this car in particular has, I could literally shoot 3 different videos on this mishap. And let me pull you in to show you exactly what happened. Now some of you may recognize this immediately, which is right here. This is from a garage door. So Johnny Driver did not know the distance between the fender and the garage door and scraped the garage door frame on the way out or the way in. I actually don't even know. It doesn't matter. So you've got this big white mark. You also have, which I don't know if it's going to show, is a scratch here, and I'm going to try to capture it. And then we have what looks like a scratch along here. I think it captures it there. That's what's tough about video. I never know it's going to show up exactly. So I'm trying to just capture it. So we have 3 distinct areas that need addressing, fixing, call it whatever you want. So this alone, this scuff, and most car owners would go into freak out mode when they hit their garage door frame, saw this, they'd be like, oh my gosh, I just trashed my car. When in reality, I know from experience that a lot of this is what's called paint transfer. Actually, to be more specific, we just call it transfer because, well, often you will know how the owner of the car did this. I know specifically that the owner caught this on the garage door frame. Once again, on the way out, way in, that part I don't know, it doesn't matter, because what I do know is that the garage door frame in this particular case is the plastic type with the rubber gasket on it. So let's say you didn't know exactly, let's say you were a professional detailer and you didn't know exactly what how this happened, because this white could actually be deep gouges into the paint that you think is a result of the color of the paint being gouged off or scraped off, and you don't even understand what transfer is. So what transfer is literally that. What you hit, that material, whatever it is, whether it's painted, cement, wood, some of that material that it's made out of or coated with or painted with gets transferred onto the car in the process of scraping along it. So that's what transfer is. Now, why is that important? Because underneath the transfer, once we remove the transfer, because that is the first step we need to do, is assess, okay, is there any transfer on this paint? Because that will be the first step to deal with, is to eliminate or remove the transfer. Then we can assess and determine what permanent damage has been done to the actual car paint itself, rather than transfer that's sitting on top of the car paint. As a rule, you can accept that there's going to be both. So you may recognize transfer and you may think, oh, no big deal, I can fix it, it's easy, I just got to remove the transfer. Just know that as a rule, there's going to be some kind of damage underneath. So let's get rid of the transfer. How does Darren do that? Well, Darren reaches for acetone. It's not the only way, it's just the way that I typically am going to approach this. Also, a word of caution, not all acetone is created equal. I live in California, a highly regulated, very liberal state. So they want to regulate everything out of everything and water it down to the point of ineffective. So this acetone may not be the same type of acetone in your state. That's why you have to test it. Now this paint is fully cured factory paint. I know that. I'm able to verify that with the customer. You may not know that on your own car. You may have bought a new car, or I'm sorry, may have purchased a used car. You may not know the full history. And by the way, as a little side note, just because Johnny Customer says or insists that it's never been repainted, you still have to verify. You know why? Because people forget. Maybe they misrepresent, maybe they flat out lie, but most of the time they just forget. If they've had a car for 3, 4, 5 years, honestly, and an accident happened 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, they may not remember that moment, and they may just think like, oh no, because if it wasn't a major accident that traumatized them mentally, they're not going to necessarily remember. So if you just dive in there thinking it's factory paint, fully cured, 2-stage base color coat with a top clear coat, and you reach for acetone, and then you find out that some color is coming off on your rag, and now you go into freak out mode because you're a DIYer or you're a beginner detailer, that might be a problem. So you always test. But how do you test? Well, you test in an area that's called an inconspicuous area. It's not clearly visible to the eye. Maybe the inside of the fender well lip. Pick a spot way up underneath here, whatever. But what you do need to do is, just because this panel tests okay, what you notice is that there's a separation in the panels here. So this panel may have been repainted or vice versa, and you test here and it looks like the coast is clear, but then you get up here and suddenly you have a different result happening. So you've got to test to verify. So acetone, that's my go-to. Now I pull out my cheap Costco microfiber cloth, which I'm a big fan of. I dabble acetone. Now I'm going to do a couple ways here. So I'm just going to do it right here. Bam. See? And I can tell right here that it is 99.9% all transfer. I can see that the paint is slightly, and I emphasize the word slightly, diminished in gloss. That's like, I could literally just rub that with some polish by hand and restore that, and Johnny Customer would be happy as can be because it would look perfect. So acetone, that's just my go-to. You see how easily that came off. But once again, like everything else in life, transfer is not all created equal. So what's some other alternatives? One of my favorite go-to is the magic eraser. Yes, it is like literally magic sometimes. So this is effective. It's just not as efficient. See those two words? Effective, efficient. They sound the same, but in reality, they're very different. Efficient has to do with the process. Effective has to do with the results. So this is effective, but not necessarily as efficient as the acetone. Do you get the difference? Let's see how efficient and effective this is. Here's my all-purpose cleaner, and no, it's not Griot's Garage. I just use this bottle and I refill it with my own stuff. So I'm going to take the magic eraser and I'm going to start rubbing, because you may not have acetone at your house. You may be here on YouTube because you just had a little mishap pulling out of the garage and you don't want the wifey or the hubby knowing what you just did. So you go into freak out mode, you jump onto YouTube and you look for a quick solution, and you don't have acetone around the house. You're like, oh my gosh, what can I use? Well, the magic eraser will remove this. Eventually, you can actually scrape at some of this with your finger, but you can tell how much I've rubbed already, and it still remains most of it. So while I know I can get the results with this, A, it's not as efficient as the acetone, and B, the more I rub with this magic eraser, it's going to abrade this paint. The acetone did no damage. This will eventually abrade the paint, and then you will have created a follow-up problem in the process of removing this transfer. So, what else can we use? Let's try from my bag of tricks, rubbing alcohol. And this is meaning rubbing alcohol comes in different blends. Like this is what's called 70%, and that's a word I rarely can pronounce correctly. Isopropyl alcohol. I have no idea what that means. So let's see how effective and efficient this is. Okay, I'm rubbing very aggressively and it is breaking it down, but I also know that as I rub that hard with virtually any cloth, I don't care how much you paid for your microfiber cloth, it is going to dull this paint. So this is where experience comes in. I already know all this stuff. I'm just illustrating it for your guys' entertainment value. I already know that I'm just going to grab the acetone, I'm just going to cut to the chase, I'm going to remove all the transfer first, so then I can reassess and figure out what kind of damage, in fact, is going on. So I will add this. There is multiple ways I can get this off. For example, let's say you lacked experience and you think, oh, I'm going to wet sand it off. I could wet sand it off too, but that's going to create more work for myself, because now if I wet sand this off, now I'm going to have to polish out those wet sanding marks, as well as deal with any permanent scratches or gouges that are left behind that are hiding beneath the transfer. So my conclusion is acetone. So let's clean this all up rather quickly. And this is assuming that I did my little test spots already. So bam, right there, I'm going to look like a superstar to whomever. Is it whomever or whoever?
Whomever sounds good. I don't know.
Yeah, whomever sounds correct. But who knows? The grammar police is not around in the moment. The grammar police is not on set in the moment, so I can say whatever I want. So right now I'm going to look like a superstar. I could bust out some polish, just wham, wham, wham by hand, some wax, and virtually it's like, wow, Darren, you rock, man. You're a stud. You know what you're doing. You're whatever. That's just because the transfer, most of this was transfer. I can tell that there's a little bit of damage under here. Plus we have this scratch here and this other one here. But bam, right there, it's pretty much done. So a lot of you, because you don't have experience, once again, if you're the do-it-yourselfer, you're in panic mode, you jumped onto YouTube to figure out, oh, YouTube, the University of YouTube. Endless opinions, endless approaches. The problem is you got to figure out if it's actually a good approach or an appropriate approach for your particular situation. So here we are. Now what I want to do is I actually want to clean this up completely, and by cleaning up I mean removing any residue, so I can scrutinize and assess the paint specifically to see what damage was hidden underneath the transfer. So let me bring you up close and you can see, and once again, I don't know if it's going to capture it, and my hand looks like ghostly white in this film for whatever reason. So it appears that there's not much scratches going on, but I know, which once again is not going to be revealed on camera, that there is some damage to the paint. It's very subtle, but there's some damage. But what I want to do is clean this up so I can really assess what's going on. And here we have my IPA, which actually could be mislabeled. It stands for isopropyl alcohol. That's what they typically call like the 50-50 blend. There's many labels for it. I carry it around with me wherever I go. This is half distilled water, half rubbing alcohol. It's just a good, effective way to clean up the paint, remove any residual waxes, sealants, acetone in this case, whatever. So I can see that there's some stuff going on, unwanted stuff. There's just scratches. They're subtle, they're light, they're what you would call superficial. So I'm not seeing any deep gouges. So let me add this little sidebar, because at the beginning I addressed this scratch right here. Let me introduce you to what we call in the industry the fingernail test. That means you take a fingernail and you go across or against the grain of the scratch. So if the scratch is like this, you drag your nail across the scratch to see if you can catch an edge. What becomes tricky, because this is one of the questions I ask my customers when they call me to do car paint scratch repair, is I say, hey, can you grab an edge with your fingernail? The problem with that is that you can have something that appears like a scratch, as in it has been scratched into the paint, when in fact it's actually transfer that's sitting on top of the paint that looks like a scratch, feels like a scratch, but is in fact transfer sitting on top of the paint rather than a scratch that has done damage to the paint. One goes in, one is sitting on top. So does your nail, your fingernail, have the ability, or let's be more precise, does your mind have the experience to discern the difference between a scratch that is into the paint? Because if my nail catches it, which it is on this, but because it's such a thin scratch, it is hard for me, even with all my experience, to know if that is in fact sitting on the paint or it's a scratch into the paint. And the reason I even question this is because I know how this was how this accident originally happened. So when she was driving out of the garage, how did it happen, Hunter? Was she coming in or out of the garage?
She was coming out.
Okay, so she was going out. Did she pull in to the garage?
Yeah.
So she was backing the car out of the garage. So that would suggest she scraped it like this. Would that be right? Yeah. It doesn't matter. Point is if the garage door is vertical and she scrapes it, and then suddenly we've got this scratch coming down like this, that suggests strongly to me that this happened at a different time, independent of this. That's why I have to go into detective mode again, which is where experience comes in. So I already know that if the scratch happened this way, but then I've got scratches coming in different angles, it's like, hey, wait a minute, this probably is a different moment. I need to look at that independently of this. And that's where people will tend to oversimplify most everything in life. It's kind of upside down world. It goes like this. Things that are truly complex, we tend to oversimplify. Things that actually can be very simple, we want to complicate it. So we tend to live in upside down world. This is a moment where people will tend to oversimplify it and they'll think, oh, that's part of this. And they kind of, anyhow, I know differently. So I'm doing the fingernail test. I can catch an edge. What I don't know for sure is if this is in fact a scratch or transfer. So once again, I'm going to reach for my acetone and I'm going to test this spot out specifically first to see if in fact it is transfer. And actually, a little secret, I tested this before I turned the camera on, so I know that it's actually transfer. It just looked exactly like a scratch, and I guarantee if I lined up 1,000 people, 999 of them would say it was a scratch. I would have said it was a scratch until I tested it and found out that it was in fact transfer. But now that I've removed the transfer, guess what? It's nice and smooth, but I can still see a scratch that I know, regardless of how close up I bring the camera, it's very unlikely that you will be able to see it because it goes right along here. I'll try in different angles. See, what you're seeing is all this reflection, like my tool chest and everything in my garage behind me. That's what's tough about scrutinizing paint, is it's a reflective surface. So are you looking at the reflection or a mirror? That's what a mirror does. or are you actually looking at the surface of the reflective material? I hope that makes sense to you. So this, in essence, is like a mirror. It's revealing a reflection. So this is not really my toolbox. This is just simply a reflection of my toolbox. So as your eye is looking at this, do you have the ability to, or does your eye trained with the capacity to look at the surface, scrutinize the surface of this paint or this panel, and in essence look through the reflection? Hopefully I didn't lose you there. But that's what's tricky about analyzing paint, and that's where special lights, LEDs, fluorescence, whatever can be helpful. But it's really more about training the eye to see what you need it to see. So despite your inability to see this or my inability to capture it on film, I know that there's a scratch here. I know there's some abrasions here. So at this point, you could call it quits, because from a distance, you're like, damn, it's fixed, honey. And you wouldn't even have to tell her about it. But if it's Johnny customer and you're doing work for him, of course they're going to come up, they're going to put their eye about 3 inches away from this panel, and they're going to scrutinize it to death, and they're going to see all these abrasions. So the job's not done yet. But the good news is that it's what I call very superficial, or what most people in the industry call surface scratches, I think. Which to me is, I don't know if I'd say redundant, but kind of silly, because really, if you have a surface, any damage as a rule is coming from the surface, right? So you'll get this if you're if you're trying to get into the business, you'll get people to say, oh, I think they're just surface scratches. It's like, well, isn't every scratch going to be from the surface, as in originating from the surface down? So that's just the customer trying to diminish the scope of work so that you won't charge them a lot or whatever. Anyhow, so I call them superficial scratches, minimal, whatever, abrading. So now I'm going to bust out the buffer. So we've removed the transfer. I assessed this particular scratch that actually was not a scratch, but transfer that appeared like a scratch. So that's gone, but it did left a little or very subtle scratch behind. But I cannot grab it at all with a fingernail. So that tells me it's very subtle. That's the good news, because I know that I can just bust out my DA polisher right now, and this thing will look perfect. But there's a scratch here that I believe is actually a scratch, as in into the paint. But that's a video for another time. Right now, I'm just going to buff this out, and I'm good to go. Allow me to introduce this little beauty. This is Meguiar's DA microfiber correction system. Now, just as a heads up, this comes in two formats. One is a 6-inch, one is a 5-inch. That's not that critical. It's not going to make or break your world. So underneath this video, there's going to be a little area that says show more. If you click on that, it will what's that word, populate. Actually, it will drop down and it will show a description of this video, and it will have links to my website for a full description of this, because this is actually what I recommend for any beginner. You know why? Because it's got, minus the buffer, okay, that's a different conversation, which I will get to. It has everything you need to polish the paint on your car. So it's got the pads, it's got the two polishes. It even comes with a backing plate. I'm not exactly sure why it comes with a backing plate, because if you buy a buffer, as a rule, it's going to come with a backing plate. So this is made for a 6-inch backing plate. These are the pads that it comes with. There's two of each. One is what's called a cutting pad, which is your first step, or your more aggressive step. Compounding is typically what you guys in audience land call it. Compounding versus polishing. Compounding suggests that it's more aggressive. And in the industry, that is the accepted terminology. Compounding is the more aggressive first step in polishing. So there's two types of pads. The first, the second, it's made for a 6-inch backing plate. You'll see that there's a little overhang to it, and that's good. Now, I still could use a 5-inch pad on a 6-inch buffer in the event that you made a mistake and ordered the wrong one. And as a rule, because I know many of you ask, and any beginner, this is, once again, let me introduce you to another part of Upside Down World. Through my experience of talking with literally hundreds of guys, a couple things, well, many things reveal themselves. One of the things is that guys, when they have a choice between buffers, like for example, the RUPES has a 6-inch or a 5-inch, or a long throw that's a 21 millimeter or a 15 millimeter. Because guys are beginners, they think that the 15 millimeter is the winning combination for them because it has a shorter throw. And they think smaller, and I guess the logic is that they can control it better, they can get into tighter areas. Personally, through experience, I would go with the bigger one because most panels on your car are exposed and big and either flat or mostly flat. So I want to have a bigger area that I'm working with versus a smaller area. So if you think that with your 15 millimeter throw you're going to get into these little tight areas, it's not going to happen. I can virtually get into most every area, whether it's a 6-inch or a 5-inch. There's only going to be a subtle difference. But on the bulk of the area, which is what a car is, it's very exposed. So that's why I default to a 6-inch pad, a 6-inch backing plate, and the larger throw of a DA polisher if you have a choice. Now there's many DAs that are very good, whether it's a RUPES, Griots, Meguiar's. It's hard to go wrong, put it that way. But you can check out my links, and I've spent a lot of time writing those pages, so it will actually go into more detail than this video when it comes to choosing a buffer. So check out below this video to show more and follow those links. So I'm going to hook this up, and I'm going to just do a little buffing and show you how simple it actually can be. Anyhow, this is a used pad. It's not one of the brand new ones. This is my RUPES. This is my 21 Bigfoot. Means 21 millimeter throw, as in the way it oscillates. I've used this pad already. Obviously I use it on a blue single stage paint job, otherwise it would still be white. So welcome back to the Upside Down World. Most beginners will fall into the proverbial more is always better mentality. Well, guess what? Sometimes more is just that. It's just more. It doesn't mean it's better. And sometimes more is actually a problem. Because if you use too much compound, what happens is you get a bunch of sling. You make a big fat mess. You get excess compound into the seams. And it actually becomes a problem. So you can see how the small amount of polish I have put on this pad for this initial and the only polishing I'm going to have to do on this panel to take it from almost perfect to perfect. So, and also it has speed ratings. Really, if you're a beginner, this is my best word of advice for you. Just pick a damn buffer, okay? They're pretty much all really good. Don't overthink it. You know why? Because if you actually stay with it and you start buffing more and more, you're going to be seduced into buying another buffer because you will not be able to help yourself. So don't overthink the first one. So if you sit there on the fence forever, you're never going to get any experience. So just choose a buffer. Read my website. That's what I help you do, is figure out how to simplify the process and help you make a decision. So pick a buffer. Pick a kit that comes with everything that you need, and you just start buffing. Now, if you're afraid, which most of you probably will, because you'll be worried about swirl marks or burning the paint because you've been on like endless car detailing forums or Facebook groups and you hear all this stuff and you're like, oh my gosh, and you go into freak out mode and panic mode and you freak out to the point where you're frozen with anxiety. So pick a damn buffer, put on the pad, put on some compound or polish, and just polish. Pick a speed setting. You're in control based on the speed, based on the pressure, based on how time, the duration that you spend in an area. So you have a lot of control. A couple things to note. Well, let me take my inexpensive microfiber virgin cloth and wipe this off. Now, for all you seasoned detailers or you keyboard jockeys, you'll notice that I have a ring on. That is a detailing faux pas, meaning you don't do that. Why? Because it's metal and you may slip and you can scratch the paint. So you don't wear anything that actually is hard. These bracelets, my man jewelry, they're made out of leather, so it's a non-issue if I hit the paint with this. But once again, is once you learn the rules, you know how to operate outside of the rules. So, you see how much polishing I did? This panel looks flawless. I don't see anything. You may have noticed that I spent a little more time in this area because there was a subtle scratch left behind once I removed the transfer from that independent scratch. But all this abrasion, totally gone. So, hopefully you learned a few things. If you like what you saw, subscribe to the channel. If you haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? I put out videos as often as I can, which for many of you is not often enough, but guess what? This is actually what I do for a living. So, and you can help support this cause so that I can make more videos by using my links to shop with. Every time you click on one of those links, it's going to open up in a new window into Amazon. And then we got the neighbor next door as I'm shooting this video. Welcome to Videoland. That's okay. Happens all the time. You will be, at least your voice will be, on YouTube to all my audience. Hunter, you want to get him a card? So, once again, welcome to my world. You never know, the trash guy, the gardener, the friendly neighbor, it just is what it is. So, here we have perfection. Transfer, took it off, some subtle scratches, polished them out. Point is, if you're a beginner, get a buffer in your hand and just do it, okay? I could literally sit here on this edge and polish for like literally 5 minutes and I would not worry about burning an edge because it's just that user friendly. So don't overthink it, get some time behind the buffer and then build upon that. Till next time.